I came home a day early to surprise the woman I was going to marry. My suitcase rolled over the flagstones, the porch lantern was already lit and buzzing softly, and the black front door hung half open. On the top step sat something wrong, my red mug, half full of coffee gone cold in the evening air. Then Mara burst off the porch, red dress, swollen eyes, and she ran straight into my arms and sobbed against my chest until my shoulder went wet. In the doorway, Camille appeared. She didn't say a word. She just stared. My name is Desmond Hayes. I am 33 years old, and I live in a quiet neighborhood on the east side of Austin, Texas, in a house with a porch I built myself over 2 long weekends and a lawn I never quite finished mowing. I work in cybersecurity, on the incident response side of it. When a company gets breached in the middle of the night and everyone is panicking, I am the person they call. My whole job is pulling the truth out of systems that people swear are clean. I sit in front of 6 monitors at 2 in the morning, tracing what really happened, one honest log line at a time, while everyone above me insists the numbers must be wrong. The numbers are never wrong. People are wrong. I spend my life pulling the truth out of machines. It turns out I was the last person in the world to see the one running loose in my own house. I should tell you up front that I was married once. It ended about 3 years ago. She was 2 years younger than me. It was quiet. It was nobody's villain. And we had no children to divide. When the papers were signed, I did the only thing I knew how to do with a hole in my chest. I worked. I took the worst on-call shifts, the ones nobody else wanted. I answered every emergency at every hour. I told myself I was fine because I was useful, and for a long time nobody looked closely enough to argue. Then I met Camille Brennan. It was at a charity gala downtown, the kind with a silent auction and a photographer working the room. She was radiant in a way that filled a doorway, laughing at the center of every conversation. And when she turned that light on me, out of everyone in that room, I felt chosen. Looking back, I think Camille loved the picture of me more than she ever loved me. A man who owned a home, kept his voice low, and never made a scene. I was a good frame for her portrait. I didn't understand that yet. I just felt lucky, and after 3 years of feeling like nothing at all, lucky was enough. I met her sister at a backyard barbecue that first summer, at the Brennan family house with the string lights and the smoking grill and the country radio turned down low. Mara was the quiet one at the edge of the yard, the one nobody was performing for. While Camille held the patio like a stage, Mara asked me an actual question about my work, and then she did something almost no one does. She listened to the whole answer. She didn't check her phone. She didn't wait for her turn to talk. She just listened, the way I listen to a system when I am trying to hear what it is really telling me underneath all the noise. That was the pattern from the very beginning, though I couldn't see the shape of it while I was standing inside it. Camille was always in the center of the frame, and always, somehow, busy. Busy with a client, busy with a launch, busy with the version of her life that photographed well. Mara was always at the edge of the frame, quiet, steady, easy to overlook if you happened to be looking at the wrong sister. And I was looking at the wrong sister for 2 years. About 18 months ago, Mara gave me a gift. She threw pottery as more than a hobby by then. She had a small studio across town and hands that were always faintly gray with clay. She handed me a mug she had thrown herself, glazed a deep, dark red, the surface a little rough under my thumb where her fingers had shaped it. "For your morning coffee," she said. "You're always up before the rest of the world anyway." I laughed and thanked her, and set it by the coffee maker, where it quietly became the only cup I ever reached for. I didn't know she had made 2. I didn't know she kept the other one, on her own shelf, across town. I want you to hold on to that mug. It is the truest thing in this entire story. And I walked past it every single morning for a year and a half, without understanding a single word it was trying to say. The first hour after I came home is a blur I have replayed 100 times since. Mara pulled back from me, horrified at herself, wiping her face with the back of her hand, apologizing for something she couldn't finish saying. And Camille filled the doorway the way she filled every room, already talking, already shaping the story before I had even set down my bag. "Desmond, thank God you're home," she said. "I have to tell you something, and it's going to be hard to hear." She said it loudly, for the porch, for the neighbors, for me. "She's been in love with you this whole time, my own sister. She's been trying to take you from me since the day you two met. And today she finally admitted it, right to my face." I stood there with my suitcase still in my hand and my shoulders still damp, and I waited for Mara to fight back. In my line of work, the guilty always talk. They flood you with explanations. They raise their voices. They build a wall of words between you and the log file, because the log file is the one thing that will convict them. The innocent, in my experience, go quiet, because the truth doesn't need decoration. The truth can afford to just sit there. Mara didn't say a word in her own defense. She just looked at me, and then she looked at the ground, and then she picked up her bag and walked to her car. She left the red mug sitting on the step, because it was mine and not hers. And even then, even accused, even breaking, she wasn't going to walk off with one single thing that wasn't hers to take. Camille kept talking. She told me how betrayed she felt, how she couldn't believe her own blood would do this to her, how she had thrown Mara out of the house herself just minutes before I pulled up. It was a good performance. It was a genuinely good performance, and 2 years earlier I would have believed every line of it. But I do this for a living. I watch how a story is told, not just what it says, and something in the telling was off. The way a forged timestamp is off technically plausible, and wrong in a way you feel before you can prove it. "Why are you looking at the mug and not at me?" Camille asked. And there was a sharpness underneath the hurt, a thin blade showing through. "Because the mug never once lied to me," I almost said. "I didn't. Not yet." I picked it up instead. The coffee inside had gone cold, but the rim still carried the faint print of a lip that wasn't wearing Camille's lipstick. Camille never drank from this mug. She called it the ugly homemade thing, and used the matched set we bought from a store downtown. Mara had been drinking from it every morning for 10 days, in my empty house, alone, in the gray light before anyone else was awake. That was the first thread, and once I saw it, I couldn't stop pulling. While I had been in Dallas for those 10 days, running containment on a ransomware breach at a fintech client, someone had been living gently in my house. And when I walked back through my own front door, I started reading it, the way I read a compromised network, not looking for a villain, not assuming the worst, just looking, patiently, for what was consistent and what was not. The plants were watered, not drowned, not forgotten, but watered right. The big ferns on the porch that drink like they're dying, and the little succulent on the windowsill that will rot if you so much as look at it with a full can. Someone had known the difference between those two thirsts. Someone had paid enough attention to my house to learn it. The mail was stacked on the counter, sorted. The bills separated out from the rest. The whole thing held together with a rubber band. Camille had never once brought in my mail in 2 years. She said it was boring, beneath her, not her job. Someone had done it every day for 10 days and built a small, neat pile out of my small, boring, ordinary life, as if my ordinary life was worth the care. And then, the mug. The mug was the detail that finally undid me, because of where it lived. I am a creature of habit down to the bone. I keep that mug on the second shelf, handle turned to the right, so I can grab it half asleep in the dark without looking, without thinking. Whoever had used it for those 10 days had washed it every single night and set it back exactly there, second shelf, handle to the right, in the one spot in the entire kitchen that only I would ever notice or care about. You don't do that for a house you're trying to steal. You do that for a home you love and already know, in your bones, you can never have. I want to be honest with you about how slow I was, because I don't want to sound like some hero who saw it all at once. I did not have a revelation on the porch. What I had was an itch, the exact same itch I get when a client swears their systems are clean and one single timestamp refuses to line up with the rest. One quiet inconsistency that the loud story cannot explain away. Camille was handing me a version of events with an enormous amount of volume, and not one receipt to back it. Mara had handed me nothing at all but silence, watered ferns, sorted mail, and a mug turned the right way in the dark. In my job, I have learned to distrust the loudest voice in the room. Almost always, the loudest voice is the one with the most to hide, filling the air on purpose so you can't hear the quiet thing underneath. The truth doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to win the room. It just sits there, patient, on the second shelf, handle to the right, waiting for you to finally stop listening to the noise and notice it was there the whole time. And there was more, once I let myself look. The dish towel folded over the oven handle the particular way I fold it, not the way Camille bunched it. My one dying houseplant, the fussy one by the back door, moved 8 inches to the left into a patch of afternoon light it actually needed, by someone who had watched the sun move across my kitchen long enough to know where that light fell. Small things. Invisible things. The kind of things you only do for a place when you have paid it the slow, unglamorous attention that looks a lot like love, because that is exactly what it is. None of it matched the story Camille was shouting. All of it matched the sister she was trying to bury. I kept coming back to that word in my head. Consistent. In an investigation, you learn to stop asking who seems guilty and start asking what is consistent, because feelings lie and patterns don't. Camille's story was loud, and it was clean, and it fell apart the second you held it up against 10 days of evidence. Mara's silence was strange, and it was inconvenient, and every single small thing around it lined up perfectly. I had built an entire career on trusting that difference. I just had never once had to trust it inside my own front door before, against the woman I was supposed to marry. That night, after Camille finally ran out of words and fell asleep, I sat alone at my kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee I couldn't bring myself to pour out. I thought about all the times Mara had been at the edge of the frame. Every family dinner, every holiday, every small crisis. She was the one who did the dishes without being asked, who remembered which cousin was allergic to what, who carried the folding chairs up from the garage while everyone else arranged themselves for the photo. I had spent 2 years being loved loudly, in front of cameras and crowds, and I was only just beginning to understand that I had also, the entire time, been cared for quietly by someone else, and that those two things are not the same, and were never the same, and that I had chosen the wrong one without ever knowing I was choosing. Camille did not stay quiet for long. When a story is built on volume, silence is the one thing it cannot survive, and she knew it in her bones. So she did what people with something to hide always do. In every system I've ever worked, she got louder, and she got organized, and she went on offense. Within a week, she had called the entire Brennan family together. I sat in her parents' living room, on the good couch that nobody was allowed to actually relax on, and I listened to her lay it all out like a closing argument to a jury. Her sister, she said, was a jealous, broken, lonely woman who had spent 2 full years quietly trying to seduce her fiancé behind her back. She, Camille, was the victim in this, the wronged one, the good daughter, betrayed by her own blood, forced to call off her own wedding to protect her dignity. She cried at exactly the right moments, and her mother reached over and held her hand at exactly the right moments, and it was all very moving, and almost none of it was true. That was the part that turned my stomach. She had taken the one genuinely true thing in the whole story, that Mara had feelings for me, and she had sharpened it into a weapon, and now she was swinging it, full force, at the single quietest person in the family, the one person who would never once swing back to defend herself. "Are you really taking a homewrecker's side over your own fiancé?" she asked me, in front of her mother and father, her voice cracking right on cue. "I'm not taking a side," I said. "I'm reading the logs, and the logs don't match your story." She didn't like that. She liked it even less when I stayed calm, because my calm gave her absolutely nothing to push against. It's a strange skill I learned the hard way. I have sat across the table from executives who screamed at me for finding the breach in their own network, as if I had lit the fire instead of walking in with the extinguisher. I have learned to let the noise wash over me and keep my eyes down on the data, because the data is where the truth actually lives, and the shouting is only ever there to keep you from reading it. So while Camille performed her grief for her family, I did the only thing I really know how to do in this world. I collected facts, not by hacking anything, not by tearing through her phone in the middle of the night while she slept. I am not that man, and more to the point, the truth has never once needed me to become that man. I just paid careful attention to what was already sitting in plain sight, which is exactly where the evidence almost always is. In every single case I've ever worked, people think the truth is hidden. Usually it's just unwatched, and it started coming apart on its own. The way these things, you just have to stand still, keep your hands open, and catch what falls. I have watched a dozen cover-ups collapse this exact way, always for the same reason. A lie has to be maintained, constantly, at great cost, while the truth just waits. Sooner or later the person carrying the lie gets tired, and the pieces start to slip. There was the wedding fund. We had opened a joint account for it more than a year ago, and I finally sat down and read the statements I had been too trusting and too checked out to ever open before. The balance was a small fraction of what it should have been. Over the previous 6 months, money had drained out of it in steady, deliberate, unhurried withdrawals, moving to accounts I had never seen and couldn't name. I didn't storm anywhere. I didn't accuse her of a thing. I just printed the pages out, one by one, and set them in a folder, the same way I document an incident for a client, and I let the paper do the talking because paper is patient and paper doesn't cry on cue. There was Simone. She was an old friend of both sisters, warm and a little scattered, and she called me one evening to say how sorry she was that the wedding had fallen through. And then, thinking I surely already knew, assuming I was inside the story instead of outside it, she let something slip. "Well," she said gently, "at least Trevor's still in the picture for her." And then the line went very, very quiet when she heard my silence and realized, all at once, that I had absolutely no idea who Trevor was. Trevor Nash. It took me one careful, sleepless evening to understand exactly who he was, an ex-boyfriend of Camille's, a man she had once told me was ancient history, dust, nothing, a man she had, in fact, reconnected with more than half a year ago, and I didn't have to break into anything to see it. The story was already fully assembled and just waiting to be read, in the timeline, in the drained account, in the 6 months, in the way Camille had been far too busy to watch her own fiancé's house while I was 3 hours away in Dallas. Too busy with a client launch, she'd told me. So Mara had volunteered instead. That, and only that, was the entire reason Mara had ever been in my house at all. And then there was the vendor. A wedding coordinator I had genuinely never met called me about a final unpaid invoice, confused, apologetic, because half the deposits on the account had been paid from a card that wasn't ours, in a name that wasn't mine. The paper trail rustled together like a pile of dry leaves in the fall, and every single page pointed in exactly the same direction. And it was not, in any version, the direction Camille had been shouting at her family. The night I laid it all out on the coffee table at home, Camille finally broke character. She saw the folder, the printed statements, the coordinator's invoice, and she understood, all at once, that the log file does not care how loud you are. It never has. She snatched the red mug off the second shelf, the one Mara had thrown with her own hands, and drew it back to hurl it against the wall. "This ugly, homemade piece of garbage," she hissed, as if the mug itself had somehow betrayed her, as if a cup of fired clay could take the stand and testify against her. I caught her wrist before she could let go. I took the mug out of her hand, gently, without a struggle, and set it back where it lived, second shelf, handle to the right. My hands were completely steady. That surprised even me. "You can throw whatever you want," I said quietly, "but you don't get to break this." The living room went silent then, a heavy, final kind of silence, the exact silence that settles over a server room at 4 in the morning, when the last alarm finally goes quiet, and you realize the damage is already done, has been done for a long time, and all that's left now is to stand there and see it clearly. Camille had spent 2 years being the loudest voice in my entire life, and in the enormous quiet that came after, I could finally hear every single thing she had spent those 2 years drowning out. Mara agreed to meet me at her studio. I told myself it was only to return her things, and to hear her side of it at last, and both were true, and neither was the whole reason, and I think by then I finally knew the difference between a reason that is real and the one that is truest. The studio smelled of wet clay and kiln heat, a warm mineral smell that got into your clothes. Shelves lined with unfired bowls the color of bone, a wheel still speckled from her last session, her apron gone gray at the hips from 1,000 wipes of her hands. When I came in, I set the red mug from my kitchen on the work table, the one she had made me, carried across town in my truck. I couldn't have said why, except that it was the one thing in that house I couldn't stand to leave behind. She stood behind the work table with her arms crossed over her chest, guarding herself, and she would not quite look at me. "I need to say this once, and then you never have to see me again," she said. "Camille told the truth about exactly one thing. I do love you. I have for a long time." She said it plainly, no tears, no performance, like she was setting down something impossibly heavy she had carried much too far. And that is exactly why I never said a single word to you. You were with my sister. I was never going to be the reason your life fell apart. So I stayed quiet, and I stayed at the edge of every room, and I told myself that being near you was enough, that it had to be enough. She took a slow breath. I came to your house because you asked me to watch it, and because Camille couldn't be bothered to, and because 10 days alone in your kitchen was the closest I was ever going to let myself get to you. That was all it was ever going to be. I made my peace with that a long time ago. Then she told me what she had seen. Trevor, at the house, one ordinary afternoon when she hadn't expected another soul to be there. The way Camille had first panicked, and then, when panic didn't work, had turned on her instead, had found the second red mug tucked in the bottom of Mara's bag, understood in one glance exactly what it meant, and decided in a single heartbeat to burn her own sister to the ground before I could get home and hear anything. Mara told all of it flatly, like a report, like an incident summary, not like a plea. She wasn't asking me to choose her. She was handing me the truth and stepping back from it, so I could never say she'd pushed. You deserve the truth, she said, not me. Those two things aren't the same, and I need you to know that I know that. I didn't come to your house to win you. I came because it was the only place that ever felt quiet enough to breathe in. And I'm sorry that being near you cost you this much. On the work table between us sat the two red mugs, side by side, mine and its twin, matched right down to the rough grain of the glaze where her thumbs had pressed. I made two, she said quietly. I kept one. That mug is the only thing I ever let myself take from you, and I'm giving it back now. She reached up to her own shelf and took down the twin, the one she had kept for 2 years, and set it on the work table beside mine, and slid hers the last inch toward me. That small gesture told me more than any speech could have. She was handing back the one piece of me she had ever allowed herself to keep, holding on to nothing, refusing even the one thing that was arguably hers, the way she had lived at the edge of my life the whole time. I wanted to cross that table so badly it was a physical ache. Everything in me wanted to close the small distance between us, to tell her that I saw her now, that I had probably been seeing her for far longer than I had ever let myself admit, and that the quietest person in every room had somehow been the loudest thing in my chest for months. But I didn't move. I stood completely still, and it was the hardest stillness of my entire life. Every instinct I had was screaming to reach for her, and every ounce of sense I had left was telling me that reaching now would ruin the one thing worth protecting. Because in that moment I finally understood something. If I reached for Mara now, here, in the middle of the wreckage, with the whole family still choosing up sides, I would be handing Camille the exact story she had built with her own hands. I would be proving her lie true. And Mara, who had stayed silent for 2 full years rather than take one single thing that wasn't hers, deserved so much better than to be some man's rebound in the middle of a war she never started. Then let the truth stand on its own, I said, and let me stand still for a while. I ended it with Camille cleanly after that, without a courtroom, without a single act of revenge. She had done more than enough damage to her own life. She didn't need me to add 1 ounce to it. I moved the wedding gently into the past tense, closed the drained account, and returned the ring without a speech. I took my own mug back home with me, but I left her twin sitting right there on her work table, because I wasn't ready to take anything from her either. Not yet. Not like this. Some things, if they are actually real, can afford to wait. 8 months went by. Winter came to Austin, mild and gray and short, and then it eased slowly toward spring. And in all of that time, Mara and I kept a careful, deliberate, respectful distance from each other. Not because either of us had stopped feeling a single thing we hadn't, but because the truth needed room to settle and breathe, and because a thing built in the middle of a storm never holds once the weather clears. I wanted whatever this might one day become to be able to stand up in broad daylight, in front of anyone who cared to look, with absolutely nothing left to explain and nothing left to hide. The truth spread on its own, the way it always does once you finally stop fighting it and just let it breathe in the open air. I never had to make a single case to the Brennan family. I never sat them down. The statements, the coordinator's invoice, the drained account, the timeline of those 6 months, they all did the quiet work for me, one honest fact at a time, and one by one, slowly, the whole family came to understand what had actually happened in my house that week while I was gone. And Trevor, for his part, did exactly what men like Trevor always do in the end. The moment Camille's life stopped photographing well, when there was no wedding, no house, no comfortable, admirable story left to stand inside of, he simply drifted off without a word or a sound. He was never in it for her. He was in it for the picture too. Camille lost the audience she had performed for her entire life. There was no dramatic downfall, no screaming scene at a dinner table, nothing you'd put in a movie. It was quieter and sadder than that. She simply grew smaller and dimmer in the family's eyes, month by month. As the facts settled in around her, and within a season she quietly moved to another city to start herself over somewhere the story hadn't reached yet. I didn't celebrate any of it. I want to be clear about that. I felt no triumph watching it happen. I just felt the room she had shouted in for 2 years finally, at long last, go still. Mara and I found our way back to each other slowly, carefully, through small and honest things. A text about a kiln that wouldn't hold its temperature. A question about how to back up her studio's photos and client files, which was, I'll admit it now, a paper-thin excuse on both of our parts. And we both knew it. And we both let it stand. We were careful with each other in those months. Almost formal, two people who had somehow agreed without ever once saying it out loud to let this grow entirely at its own pace, in its own season. Instead of forcing it into early bloom and watching it die in a late frost. There were long stretches where we didn't speak at all, and I let those stretches be, even when the silence pulled at me. I had spent my whole life rushing to fix things the instant an alarm went off. And this was the first time I understood that some things heal precisely because you don't touch them. Every week that passed without a scandal, without a scene, without me reaching too soon, was another week the truth quietly set a little harder in everyone's mind, until there was nothing left for anyone to argue about. I wasn't waiting because I was unsure. I was the surest I had ever been about anything. I was waiting because she deserved a beginning that no one could ever call a betrayal, and because I loved her enough to give the truth the time it needed to become simply, plainly obvious to the whole world. Then one ordinary morning, I chipped the mug. I reached for it half asleep, handle to the right where it always faithfully waited for me, and I caught the lip of it on the hard edge of the shelf. A clean crack ran straight down one side, the deep red glaze splitting open like a seam. I stood there in my kitchen in the early gray light, holding it in both hands like I'd broken something that could never in this world be replaced. And I understood, standing there, that I was not going to throw it in the trash. I got in my truck and drove it all the way across town to her studio instead. Mara turned it over slowly in her clay-gray hands and smiled the first real, whole smile I had seen from her in the better part of a year. I can fix this, she said, but not the way you're thinking. She showed me a week later. She had filled the crack with a thin, bright seam of gold, glowing against the deep red of the glaze. The break not hidden away or sanded smooth, but lifted up, lit, turned somehow into the single most beautiful thing about the entire cup. It didn't look repaired. It looked like it had survived something and come out the other side, stronger for it, wearing the proof right there on its skin where anyone could see. It's called kintsugi, she said, tracing the golden line down with one finger. You don't hide the break. You let it show. And it holds better than it ever did before. So do people, I said. She didn't look away this time. Neither did I. We just stood there together in the warm, mineral air of her studio, the kiln ticking softly as it cooled behind her, the smell of fresh coffee drifting from the little pot she always kept going in the corner, and something that had waited too long, patient, quiet years finally, gently, stopped waiting. We took it slowly even then, out in the full open, with no one left to convince, and nothing at all to hide from anyone. Sunday mornings at her studio, her working the wheel while I answered work emails badly at the corner table. Long walks where neither of us felt any need at all to fill the silence, because we had both already spent more than enough of our lives being talked over by louder people. And the very first time we sat down across from each other for coffee with no excuse at all, no broken kiln, no backup, no reason on earth but simply wanting to be there, we both noticed it at the exact same moment. And we both, at last, just let it be true. The edge of the frame, it turned out, had been the center all along. I had only been looking at the wrong sister for 2 years, and life, patient as a slow-cooling kiln, had simply waited for me to finally turn my head and see. I'm telling you all of this now, from the far side of it, knowing everything I couldn't possibly have known standing on that porch. I spent my entire career pulling the truth out of systems, tracing the one honest line through all of the noise and the panic and the shouting. And the truest thing in my whole life had been standing quietly at the edge of every single room the entire time, saying almost nothing at all, watering the ferns exactly right and turning the mug handle to the right, On the shelf in my kitchen, two deep red mugs sit side by side now, a matched pair reunited at last. One of them has a bright seam of gold running down its side, catching the morning light every day when the sun comes through the window over the sink. I reach for that one first, every single morning, without even having to think about it. Camille shouted the truth to use it as a weapon. Mara whispered it to set me free. I married the quiet one, and I have never once had to check the logs since. So let me leave you with this tonight. If someone weaponizes the truth against you, the way Camille did to her own sister, does staying silent make you weak, or does it quietly make you the honest one? And have you ever, in your own life, missed the person who truly loved you, simply because they were too quiet about it for you to hear? If Mara's silence hit home for you, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories like this one. And tell me down in the comments, would you have forgiven my long pause, or would you have run to her the very moment the truth finally came out? I promise you, I'll be reading every single answer.